Newfoundland and Labrador's proposed hydro deal with Quebec could be on life support. This after a review panel concluded it's not in the province's best interest. Now, that draft deal was struck in 2024 and was aimed at updating the current arrangement between the provinces. Right now, Quebec is buying power from Labrador's Churchill Falls for 0.2 cents a kilowatt hour. Under the 2024 deal, they would pay about 5.9 cents. Newfoundland and Labrador gets about $20 million a year right now, and this was expected to reach an average of $1 billion a year starting in 2025 and running until 2041. And it was promised to keep growing from there, rising to $2 billion in 2044 and $4 billion starting in 2056. Then Premier Andrew Furey estimated this would land the province $200 billion over the next 50 years. The new premier, though, isn't sold on the plan. Tony Wakeham appointed an independent review committee that found some of the past government statements about revenues and financial benefits were understated, overstated, or incomplete. And that committee's report concluded the MOU in its current form is not in the public interest. The Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Tony Wakeham, joins me now. Premier, good to see you again, sir. Thank you for taking the time.
Good to see you, too.
You said yesterday when you released this report that you have a window of opportunity to improve this deal with Quebec. Does that window close if there's a change in government in the Quebec election this year?
Well, the good news is that there is an opportunity here that I would argue wasn't there 5 months ago. And that opportunity involves the federal government. As you know, the federal government under Prime Minister Carney has taken out an agenda, a nation-building agenda, has talked about, building up the nation, national energy corridors, electrification of Canada, and they've got an agenda that I think fits well for this project. The Prime Minister himself has talked about this project, the opportunities that are in Newfoundland and Labrador. When you think about our mining industry and the Labrador Trough and the amount of critical minerals that we have here in our province. So I believe that this project can do a lot to help the Prime Minister and the country. And I think there's a potential for a win for Quebec, a win for Newfoundland and Labrador, and indeed a win for the federal government.
But you say this opportunity wasn't there 5 months ago, but like in September of last year, this project appeared on a draft list of projects that could be fast-tracked in the national interest by this government. But the obstacle has been that Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec haven't gotten to final terms, right? And so you're at the beginning of your term in government. The CAQ in Quebec could be at the end of theirs if the polls are to be believed. So do you have to get something with Premier Fréchette before the election to lock down federal participation if necessary?
Well, I think that, what we've said we were going to do is I've reached out to Premier Fréchette and spoke with her, and she's ready to get back to renegotiate. I'm ready to get back to start renegotiations. I've got a new negotiating team in place, and we're ready to move as quick as we can. But it will take effort. It will take a real strong negotiation. There's no doubt about it. As you have said, the report highlights 3 areas of concern for us. One is to do with more transmission, more value, and those are the type of things that we're looking at.
But Premier,
more power.
Yes, more power, more transmission so you can sell surplus power into market and more electricity for your own industrial ambitions inside Labrador. But Premier Fréchette has said that she wants this to be a win-win for both provinces, but warns there will be no agreement on less favorable terms than what exists right now. So some tweaks maybe to how it's structured, but on the overall balancing of values and risk, Quebec seems to be saying that those things need to be kept where they are. So how do you thread that needle?
Well, I think that's why it's called negotiations, and that's where I think that both provinces, we need to get together. We need to determine where we're to in terms of negotiation, what it looks like for us, what it looks like for them, and then of course we have to see what the federal government is prepared to bring to the table, because the federal government has clearly expressed an interest in this project. So it'll be good that it's. I think about it now not simply as a partnership between 2 provinces, but a partnership between potentially 2 provinces and the federal government.
Right, but I read what Premier Fréchette is saying is that if you want more of the upside from this deal, then Newfoundland and Labrador needs to be prepared to share more of the downside, more of the risk, maybe more of the development costs. Do you see it that way?
Well, I think that that's what negotiations are for. And if I go back to the whole comment about more value, I think one of the flaws of the existing MOU was that it didn't consider the economic benefits that might be available to the province of Newfoundland and Labrador if we retain more power, if we developed our own industries. If you look at some of the statistics, for example, that were in the report, one that clearly jumps out is the amount of mining development in the province of Quebec versus the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Quebec's mining has grown by 125%, while Newfoundland and Labrador's has grown by 45%. They're both in the same Labrador trough. The reason why Quebec's is so much higher than ours is because they have had access to power to develop those things.
Right.
And that's why it's very important for me to make sure we do that economic analysis, and that needs to be part of this equation. So it's not just about how much can you sell your power for, but what is that economic value of developing your own industries, creating employment in our own province, and everything that that will bring? That's where this has to be looked at. So there's a lot of work to be done here.
Right. So that's the trade-off. There is the certainty of a long-term power purchase agreement with Quebec where you guarantee the revenue versus the potential upside of not selling that power and using it to get your industry jolted in Labrador with, clean electricity, say, for mining expansion. But do you have projects in the queue to use that power, Premier, or is it more of a theoretical thing? Because the balance sheet of the province isn't great, as I don't need to tell you, right? So like a revenue stream has some appeal.
Absolutely, and that's why, though, we already know the opportunities that exist in the mining sector, as I just spoke about, that already exist, that they certainly need more power. So those are the things that you're right, that we have the balance, and it's not going to be, and it can't be just one or the other. It has to be a combination of both, but finding that balance is the critical piece.
But if you have to take on more risk, Premier, can you do it, right? Like the province has the highest net debt per capita in the country. Is $20 billion of net debt with about 500,000, 550,000 in that range population. Can the balance sheet take on more risk?
But I think what we have to do, David, is make sure that at the end of the day, we are simply not tearing up one bad deal to sign another bad deal. We had to make sure that, in fact, the independent review did that. It highlighted some of the challenges of the current MOU. When you sit down and read through this independent review report and you hear from them how there was interference by the government in putting in an escalation clause that at the end of the day could have resulted in another $30 billion worth of debt to the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And that was done even though their own negotiators and their own financial experts advised against it. So there are things that we need to be looking at. There are things we need to change, but ultimately it comes down to making sure that as we develop these resources, we get the best deal possible for Newfoundland and Labrador.
Well, look, on the Quebec side of it, the Churchill Falls power supply that they've had since the 60s, that is a core part of their firm-based power, and they've come to rely on that. And I know this is the opportunity to try to repair some of the inequities of the past. But you talked about transmission access. Quebec wants this power. Do you expect them to just let you use their transmission lines so you can sell power they want and need to other customers instead of them?
Well, if we're going to, the federal government are talking about a national transmission, a national energy corridor, and transmission and electrification of Canada, then electrification of Canada can simply mean that Newfoundland and Labrador has to stop at its border. That's not what this is about. If we're going to have true electrification of Canada, if we're going to have a true national energy corridor, then we need to work with the province of Quebec. We need to work with the federal government, and let's find a way to make that happen.
No, but is your vision of that, because what Mark Carney talks about electrification is sort of replacing fossil fuel as a power supply for heavy industry and getting it hooked up to cleaner things or whatever. But is your vision of it them helping create a path for you through Quebec's transmission grid? Because I'm not sure that would fly with the federal government. How do you view it?
I believe there is an opportunity for just that. For too long, Newfoundland and Labrador, the only customer that we've had for the last 60 years is the province of Quebec, Hydro-Quebec. The only customer we were going to have with the current MOU was Hydro-Quebec. and it's time we change that. And that's what part of the negotiations will be about. As you alluded to, there will be things we give and things we take. But at the end of the day, it has to make sure that Newfoundland and Labrador has the ability to maximize the value of its resources.
But help me understand that, Premier, if you can. In a run-up to a Quebec election where the Parti Québécois is in first place, are you counting on the Premier and the Prime Minister to find a way that Newfoundland and Labrador can use Quebec's power grid to skirt the power needs of Quebec to get to markets? That's a tough political ask.
It's not about skirting. It's about us having access to the power that we will retain as part of this agreement. That's what it's about. So at the end of the day, what I will say is we will be there. We are willing to negotiate. We're willing to stay at the table. And it won't be because of lack of effort on our part that a deal happens.
But are you talking about access where you pay for the tariff, or are you talking about the permission to build your own transmission lines to go through their grid, or are you just talking about them carving out and reserving capacity for Newfoundland and Labrador to use?
Yes, I'm not talking about us building transmission lines through the province of Quebec. I mean, clearly what we want to do is enter into a partnership with the province of Quebec.
Okay.
For too long now, we've had this adversarial approach. And it's time that we talked about how do we make a deal that works for both of us. I believe there's an opportunity to do that. I believe the federal government can play a role in that.
Right. Well, Michael Sabia, as you know, is the Prime Minister's right-hand man, and he was the Hydro-Quebec boss who negotiated this deal with Andrew Furey. So I'm looking forward to your first conversation with him. But Premier, look, before I let you go, you've avoided a yes-no answer on whether this deal goes to a referendum with whatever comes out of the other side of this negotiation process you're embarking on with Quebec. This was the first promise on the first day of the election campaign that you won. Will this 100% go to a referendum, yes or no?
No, the answer for me on that one, David, is, as I have said and will continue to say, I need to get a deal. Everything that we just talked about, all of the issues that we just talked about, all of those challenges ahead of us, that's where my focus is. I want to make sure that at the end of the day, I get the best deal possible for Newfoundland and Labrador.
I get that, but
that's where my focus is.
But that's a process answer, and I was asking you about your promise, your election promise, because otherwise it looks like you just said it to get it off the table for the campaign. So will this 100% go to a referendum?
I have always said that I will get the best deal possible for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, and I will continue to say that.
But Premier, people are going to look at this, and if you don't say, yes, I will live up to my election promise to have a referendum, they're going to look at this and say, he's trying to get out of the referendum promise.
I have said and will continue to say, we need to get the best deal possible for Newfoundland and Labrador.
Okay, but that's not yes to a referendum or no to a referendum. It's a bit of a dodge, Premier. I say that respectfully because, but it's not a yes. I don't know if you're going to live up to that promise.
I respectfully say to you that I have to turn around, and my focus has to be on getting back to the table and fixing what has been broken in the MOU to try and make sure that we get more power, more transmission, and more value for our resources for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I will make sure that the people of Newfoundland and Labrador know fully well what we're talking about.
Okay. Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Tony Wakeham, thank you for your time, and go Habs. See ya.
Absolutely. Go Habs, go. Thank you, David.